Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. We're on a bit of a tight time schedule, so if you don't mind, I hate to, you may obviously continue eating and enjoy your meal. I'm Don Elliman. My honor is to be the Chancellor of the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus, and it really is an honor for me to be there. We appreciate all of you being here today. We do have a special group of friends with us today, and I'm going to take the opportunity to introduce them. As I do, we would ask them to stand and remain standing. And for those of us who are not standing, please hold your applause until all have been introduced. They are representatives, both current representatives and representatives-elect. So we have Senator Rhonda Fields from Aurora, Senator Kevin Priola from Henderson, Representative Janet Buckner from Aurora, Representative James Coleman from Denver, the fan clubs are already starting, right? Yeah. Representative Kim Ransom from Parker, Representative Donald Valdez from La Jara, Representative Shannon Bird from Westminster, Representative Kyle Mullica from North Glen, Representative-elect Brianna Buentello from Pueblo, Representative-elect Matt Super from Delta, and Representative-elect Tom Sullivan from Centennial. And we have one former legislator here who is a dear friend of this campus and of the Cancer Center, former State Senator Pat Stedman, who was singularly responsible for the first ever cancer research funding from the state of Colorado. A funding stream that continues to this day. So hand to all of them. Thank you very much for your service. Everybody knows why we're here. We're here to talk about cancer. You know, if you think about the field of health science writ large, I don't think there's any debate that you're going to see more advances in health science and health care in the next decade than we've seen in perhaps the last 50 years, maybe longer. That's happening because of a confluence of a whole host of variables, but it is almost certainly true. And nowhere is that more likely to be true than in cancer care and in cancer cure. The discussion today is in some ways, in fact, in many ways, about hope, about giving patients and their loved ones a reason to think that there are possibilities when they might be tempted to think there are none. But as is often said, hope is not a strategy. What you'll hear about today is about strategy, actually any number of strategies. The University of Colorado Cancer Center is a world-class center for cancer science and cancer care. The people you're going to hear from today are determined to lead our center to be at the forefront of that fight going into the future. But before we begin with the panel, it's my pleasure to introduce a very special guest. Lieutenant Governor-elect Dianne Primavera has many friends in this room because of cancer, living it, fighting it, educating her colleagues and the public about it, and supporting others who do all these things is at the core of her life's experience. She is a 4-time cancer survivor, having first been diagnosed in 1988 with a fairly dire prognosis. She has been treated by our Cancer Center clinical faculty, among others, and we're very fortunate to have her here today as not only in her history as a 4-term state rep, first elected in 2006, and where she carved out a distinguished career. She chaired Public Health and Human Services Committee. She carried dozens of healthcare bills, many related to cancer. Among those, a bill to require healthcare plans to cover clinical trials, which for this campus was absolutely critical. She chaired the Legislative Audit Committee, a task I wouldn't wish on anybody, and she was a guiding intellectual force behind the creation of the Legislative Cancer Caucus. Most recently, she has been the CEO of the Susan G. Komen Foundation for Colorado until chosen by Governor-elect Polis to be his running mate. She is a great friend of this campus and a champion of the CU Cancer Center. Please welcome Dianne Primavera.
Well, thank you, Chancellor, and I have my friend Jerry Johnson to thank for that really nice introduction. when he was writing the introduction. I said, that's way too nice. It doesn't sound like me. But anyway, on that note, I'm not a very hate-filled person. I'm not much of a hater. But there's one thing in life that I really do hate, and that's cancer. So I just wanted to expound a little bit on what Chancellor Elliman said. If you'd asked me 30 years ago in September, if I ever thought I would be standing up here speaking to you as Lieutenant Governor-elect, I would have told you that that was a really cruel joke, because in September of 1988, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and I was told I wouldn't live 5 years. And during the first year of my treatment, I lost my job, I lost my health insurance, and I lost my marriage as a result of the strain. And not only all those bad things, but then I also had to deal with 2 little girls who were 3 and 5 who knew that their mother might be dying. So I started treatment actually at another facility, and every oncologist that I talked to told me I had the same prognosis, that I wouldn't live 5 years. I was really young, I had a really aggressive kind of cancer. The margins were never clean when they did the surgery. And so somebody asked me, have you talked to Bill Robinson at university yet? And I said, no, but what's the point? You know, I've talked to every other oncologist and they tell me that I'm not going to make it. They said, you really ought to go out and talk to Dr. Bill Robinson. Does anybody in the room know Dr. Bill Robinson? Okay, well, then you'll enjoy this story. So I came out and I was all stressed out, and I met with Dr. Robinson, and you know, he sat down and he listened to what other people had told me about my cancer, reviewed my chart, and said, we're going to staff your case with over 200 doctors in the hospital. But he says, I can tell you one thing right now. He said, hell, Diane, you're healthier than 95% of the doctors in this hospital, so come with me and I will make you well. And so he did, and I participated in a clinical trial with Dr. Robinson, and you know, that was 30 years ago, and thank God I had a better prognosis than all the other doctors that I'd talked to had predicted. So I made it my life's work to really be a patient advocate, and I think for those of you who had worked with me at the Capitol, and there's a lot of you, I always made sure that I put the patient first in any legislation that I worked on ahead of profits. I wanted to make sure that the patient's well-being was really what we were concerned about. So I think that's part of the reason that Jared Polis called me and asked me to be his running mate on the ticket, because he wants to make sure that people know that we both value the importance of health care, that we both believe that health care is a human right, and that we're going to work tirelessly to make sure that health care is accessible and affordable and really high quality. So I'm really excited to undertake that endeavor with him and with many of you in the room. And I just want to make sure that we salute the cancer warriors in the room too. If I hadn't had those wonderful oncology nurses that sat me down in the big leather chair and put the IV in my vein, then I probably wouldn't be here today. And I think they're really some of our unsung heroes. So I just want to thank, if any of your oncology people in the room, thank you for your service in terms of saving lives. So I really value, as you can tell, the goals of the CU Cancer Center, doing the breakthrough research that they're doing and providing world-class treatment to citizens in our state and our region. So I just want to thank you all for being here today. Thank you for the great work, and I'm looking forward to working with all of you.
For those of you that don't know Bill Robinson, that is totally in character of him. Okay, now it's my pleasure to introduce kind of the meat of the program, the reason you're all here today. And to do that, I'm going to introduce a fellow that we are very, very fortunate to have with us at the University of Colorado. Dr. Richard Schulick was named director of the Cancer Center on July the 1st of this year. He is also chair of the Department of Surgery at the University of Colorado School of Medicine, which means Rich doesn't lack for things to do in the day. He is a globally renowned pancreatic cancer surgeon. He joined CU in 2012. He pioneered laparoscopic Whipple surgery at Johns Hopkins and brought that procedure with him when he came to Colorado, one of the most advanced minimally invasive techniques in surgery of the pancreas. His becoming director of the Cancer Center this year had the extra benefit of catalyzing the University of Colorado Hospital and University of Colorado Health to make a new major investment in the Cancer Center. As I said at the outset, we're very lucky to have him, and I'd like to introduce Rich Schulick.
Thank you, Chancellor Elliman, for those very kind words. What I'd like to do in the next 10 or so minutes is just describe some of the activities going on in the Cancer Center and give you a very high-level plan of what we will be doing over the next 5 and 10 years. First of all, I am so excited to be here along with my panel members. I think this is really a great opportunity to show you what's going on this campus. Before I start, I want to remind everyone that the University of Colorado Cancer Center is actually a consortium cancer center consisting of several major institutions, including the University of Colorado at Boulder, this campus here, Colorado State University, the VA, Children's Hospital, and very importantly, UC Health. So before we actually get into more details, I think it's really important to make sure everyone understands what cancer is, the basic biology and the basic problem behind cancer. So I've got this 1-minute video for us.
Cancer is a group of over 100 diseases characterized by abnormal, uncontrolled cell growth. In a healthy body, cells grow, die, and are replaced in a very controlled way. Damage or change in the genetic material of cells by environmental or internal factors sometimes results in cells that do not die and continue to multiply until a mass of cancer cells or a tumor develops. Most cancer-related deaths are due to metastasis, malignant cells that penetrate into the circulatory system and establish colonies in other parts of the body. Great advancements have been made, but cancer is still the leading cause of death for people under the age of 85. In the United States, 1 in every 4 people die from cancer.
Okay. So how bad of a problem is cancer? Well, let's look at some numbers here. In the United States, in 2018, 1.7 million new diagnoses of cancers will be made in patients, and there will be 600,000 deaths from cancer in the United States. Another way to look at this problem is, what's our lifetime risk of developing cancer or dying from cancer? Well, if you're a man, it's about 40% chance of developing cancer, 22% chance of dying of cancer. If you're a woman, it's slightly less, at 38% chance of developing a cancer and 19% chance of dying from a cancer. So if you look around this room, it's about 1 in 4 of us will pass away from a cancer in our lifetime. And I think we can all argue, what's a more important problem to tackle, get ahead of, and make progress on? There is some good news in all this, though. If you look at the period between 1991 and 2015, there's actually been a 26% drop in cancer death rates. And the reasons for this are because we're smoking less, we have better methodologies of detecting cancer early, and we have better treatments for cancer. And what all of us would like to see is an acceleration of this process. So in 10 years, this statistic is we've dropped it by 80%, 90%, 95%. And that's what we want to do in this cancer center and across the campuses involved in this cancer center. If you look specifically at Colorado, this is a bit hard to read, and I'll walk you through some of the top cancers here. But in Colorado, this year, 3,600 women will develop breast cancer, and about 580 will die from breast cancer. If you take the number 2 cancer in Colorado, about 3,200 men will develop prostate cancer, and about 510 will die of prostate cancer. If you look at lung cancer, about 2,600 Coloradans will develop lung cancer, and 1,600 will actually die from lung cancer. Now, I won't march through all this, but you get an idea of the heavy burden that cancer plays in Colorado, in the United States, and really all over the world. But what causes cancer? Well, the basic cause of cancer, if you simplify things, are genetic changes. And there are 3 sources of these genetic changes. Some of the genetic changes you're actually born with, and that's why there's some families that tend to have certain cancers. There are genes, changed genes that run in their families. Another cause of genetic changes are environmental factors. So smoking, tobacco, getting exposed to radiation, getting exposed to viruses, having a bad diet, these can all lead to genetic changes. And another source of genetic changes is bad luck, right? So you can actually be born with perfect genes, behave yourself and do none of this, or be exposed to any of this, but still encounter bad luck. When a cell divides, as we showed you in the video, it can divide in a wrong fashion and a cancer can propagate. But most cancers are caused by a combination of these three areas that alter our genes and results in a cancer. So what's the game plan? How are we going to eradicate the pain and suffering from cancer in Colorado and in the United States and really all over the world? Well, number one is by cancer prevention. So if everyone stopped smoking and we did common sense things, many cancers would decrease dramatically. If we can't prevent cancers, we should detect cancers early. So screening mammography, colonoscopy, pap smears, there are all kinds of methodologies to pick up cancers early. And all of us know if you can pick up a cancer early, you can cure that patient and they don't have to suffer from that cancer as much. The other way we're going to do it is by discovering new therapies. So we're going to build upon the chemotherapy backgrounds we have. We're going to build on surgical techniques. We're going to build on radiation techniques. But we're also going to explore other new areas that have come out in the last 5 or 10 years. And you'll actually hear from several of our Cancer Center members in the panel regarding immunotherapy and targeted agents. Of course, the other thing we have to do is educate and train the next generation. I have no doubt that someday I will need their care. So I and all of us have a very vested interest in training the next generation because one day I and we will be in their hands. So we better do a good job. And then lastly, and I'll spend a couple of slides on this in a few slides, but we want to establish the best network of cancer care throughout the state of Colorado using multidisciplinary clinics, and I'll show you an example of that. But what's the point of having state-of-the-art care or the best drugs or the best immunotherapies if your patients don't have access to them, or they're not getting the right advice, or they're not getting the right sequence? So that is equally important. So a lot of people think that if you have to go to the University of Colorado Cancer Center, you have to go to Aurora. That could not be farther from the truth. These are points on a map of Colorado, or a pseudo map of Colorado, of all the UC Health and Cancer Center affiliates. And you can see we're up and down the Front Range, and we go way into the west. And this is extremely important because we don't think every cancer patient should get into a car or fly to Aurora every time they need something done. The best cancer care should be given close to home when possible. If you look at the pediatric Children's Hospital Colorado locations, they're also up and down the Front Range and throughout the Denver metro area. So it's important that we have cancer care available to all patients in Colorado. So this is the traditional model of taking care of cancer patients, and unfortunately, this is still commonly the way it's done. You get a diagnosis, you meet with the surgeon, a week later you meet with the gastroenterologist, a week later you meet with your chemotherapy doctor, a week later you meet with the radiation doctor, and then 5 weeks later you start therapy. Are all these people talking to each other? And even if they are talking to each other, there's a month between these two visits. Do they really remember all the details of the patient? So what we've done here at the University of Colorado is built these multidisciplinary clinics that actually huddle around the patient and their family. So in one day they come and we actually have all the specialists there looking at all the x-rays, all the CAT scans, all the pathology tests and everything, going through all the details, coming up with a consensus plan. Sometimes we argue about what the right course of treatment is. But by the end of the discussion, we've come up with one uniform plan, and then we meet with the patient and their family, and then we have a discussion with all the doctors that are going to treat the patient in the room. So obviously, patients and families love this. It gets done in one day. It's efficient for the family and patient. They get consistent information, and a lot of their anxiety is allayed right away. So this is just an example. This is my specific field, pancreatic surgery, and this just shows you the growth in pancreatic surgeries here at the University of Colorado Hospital through building this multidisciplinary clinic for pancreatic cancer. The other thing we did was we studied our first 1,000 patients that came through, and we asked the question, well, in what % of these patients did we actually disagree with the plan that they came in with from other practitioners? And it was actually a third of the time we changed the plan, right? So I think that's a very important statistic, and it shows you that if you put 20 or 30 experts in a room looking at a problem, they're going to come up with a much better solution than one person who's thought about it somewhere else. So we established the pancreas multidisciplinary clinic, then we went to esophagus and gastric, and then lung, and then liver, and then colon and sarcoma, and we've developed several others. And all of these clinics have actually seen a similar trajectory, which makes us feel good because I think we're really helping a lot of people and putting a lot of people on the right track. Now, you actually have this in front of you. Obviously, I'm not going to go through all of it, but I do want to highlight a couple of points on this trifold that's right in front of you. We are very dedicated to give inclusive care. For fiscal year 18, the University of Colorado Health System gave $359 million of uncompensated care to the citizens of Colorado. That's up by about $100 million from the previous fiscal year. And this is really important because, again, why build the best cancer care if all patients don't have access to it? The other thing is this campus is a national leader. This cancer center is a national leader. We're one of 70 NCI designated cancer centers across the country. At an even higher level than that, we're one of 27 NCCN designated cancer centers. And what an NCCN designated cancer center is, we basically write the book on how to take care of cancer. So if anyone gets diagnosed with a cancer anywhere in the world, the first thing they do is they look at the NCCN book, which a lot of our practitioners have written chapters in, on this cancer, on that cancer. And then lastly, you'll hear more about this. We belong to an Orion consortium. Dr. Ginger Borgeous will tell you more about this. And basically, we're part of an elite group of cancer centers that's really making strides. And then also important is we have a large economic impact in Colorado. The university itself has a budget of about $2.1 billion. If you look at UC Health, their budget is about $5 billion. If you look at Children's, and this goes on and on and on. The direct economic impact of what we do on this campus is about $5.1 billion, and it's larger than Colorado's ski industry. So I hope I've left you with some points here, but we're really investing in the future. We want to increase access to care. We're recruiting elite faculty. We're building clinical trials infrastructure capable of reaching more people in Colorado. We're educating the next generation. The stakeholders on this campus, including the health system and the School of Medicine, have invested about $120 million recently in the cancer center and immunotherapy programs. So what I'd like to do is invite my panelists up, and please come on, and then I'll introduce you one at a time. Thank you. I'm getting all these weird signals from the back. I'm told my panelists are out here. Okay, so the structure of the next 25 minutes or so will be, I'll invite a panelist up. They'll speak about their area of expertise for about 5 minutes. We'll have a question and answer period at the end, except for after the first speaker, who's Karyn. She actually has another function to go to in the middle of this, but she kindly agreed to give this talk and answer questions first. So let me introduce Karyn Goodman. I'll have you come up to the microphone, Karyn. So Karyn is a professor of radiation oncology and the Cancer Center's associate director, or AD we call it, for clinical research. She's an internationally renowned expert in GI or gastrointestinal cancers and has served in numerous international as well as national positions dealing with cancer. More recently, she's actually been selected by the National Cancer Institute, which is really the NIH's main body that is working against cancer, to become co-chair of the Gastrointestinal Cancer Steering Committee, which is a huge deal. She's published over 150 peer-reviewed publications as well as book chapters, and really has participated in many, many high-level clinical trials. And as the AD of clinical research, she's leading the Cancer Center's efforts to make access to cutting-edge therapies a reality for all Coloradans. And she'll talk about the expansion of access of our clinical trials. Karyn?
Great. Well, thank you, Rich. And I want to thank all of you for being here today. And it was wonderful to hear your story, Lieutenant Governor Primavera, because I really think this really exhibits why it's so important that we do clinical research, because here's the proof of what comes of, cutting edge research, moving this field forward. And that's what I'm going to talk about here today. And I'm also very excited to see Pat Stedman, who was responsible for bringing in the funds that have really supported the work that I'm going to talk about right now. So I came here just over 3 years ago. I was recruited from Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York. And what really drew me to this place was just the energy and how dynamic the growth was here on this campus. And when I arrived, I was incredibly impressed by what I was seeing in terms of the the breadth of research that was being done in our labs here on the campus, and really the expertise of our clinical faculty that we have in the oncology groups who are doing really cutting-edge clinical research. But the one thing that I thought we could improve in terms of how we could move things forward was to really connect what we were doing in the lab to what we're doing in the clinic, and have the opportunity for our researchers to bring their new discoveries or new ideas about new therapeutic options from the conceptual stage to bringing that to the clinic and to delivering it to patients. And so what we did was we tried to develop a program to bring those ideas and new therapies to fruition, to bringing them to the patients. And we call these investigator-initiated trials. And so we had to sort of start from scratch, and actually back in the 2014, when we look back at the numbers of patients that were going on these types of trials, there were only about 70 patients that were being recruited or enrolled on these types of investigator-initiated trials. And now we have over 350 patients per year being enrolled on these types of trials. So we have 5 times more patients going on these trials that I really think are the ones that are truly pushing the field forward, because they're really taking the most exciting advances that are coming directly out of the work that's being done in our labs here, or with our clinical investigators coming up with novel ideas and bringing those to patients. But there's a lot of work that goes into developing these trials and going from the concept stage to delivery to patients. And what we had to do was we started with having a program to support our investigators to do these things. So we start from what we call an incubator committee, where we bring in a researcher that has an idea, and they're with their peers or colleagues to get feedback on how to do these trials. And then we have now hired staff who are specialists in protocol development to then help put the protocol together, get it through all the hurdles of all the administrative and regulatory issues that we have to get through, going to the FDA, to really go from having something that's just a concept to actually having an approved protocol. And so, again, with the support of the funds that we received from the tobacco settlement tax, the settlement funds, we actually have been able to fund a group of individuals who support our investigators and move these trials through the process. And we now actually have this process in place that we have monthly meetings where we have 2 investigator-initiated trials presented per month. And we review them, and we actually can provide funding in addition to just the infrastructure and administrative support. We actually have some funds to give these people to actually do some of the correlative science studies to help support these trials. So I've been so proud of what we've done here, and over these last 5 years to really be able to build that investigator-initiated trial program. The other thing, not just on this campus that we've done, is really moved out to beyond just the Anschutz campus. We've actually now developed what we call the Front Range Clinical Trials Network. And this has really been built on the expansion of the UC Health Clinical Network. And so as we saw before, we just saw the nice diagram of how widespread the UC Health system is, so that we've really capitalized on the existing clinical and financial infrastructure that's there to then now serve our patients outside of this area, just the Anschutz campus, to have clinical trials open at these sites. And we started this now over 5 years ago with what we call the National Clinical Trials Network study. These are federally funded studies that we could open out at in particular, two of the facilities we saw at UC Health North and South, which are in Fort Collins and Colorado Springs. So we developed some infrastructure to support opening those types of trials. And then now that we have this growing investigator-initiated program, we wanted to expand access to these really cutting-edge trials to our patients across Colorado. And so over the last 2 years, we've opened multiple, what we call these IITs, or investigator-initiated trials, out at our North and South campuses. And we're, again, trying to expand access to the cutting-edge medical advances. But again, this can't be done without support from our staff, our resources that are needed to really be able to have the oversight over doing the clinical research. So again, the work that's being done there, and having, we have research staff that are doing the regulatory work to open clinical trials that may be open at different sites, but it's all being overseen here at the main campus. So that's also come from the funds that we've gotten from the Tobacco Settlement Agreement. And again, I think this has been invaluable to our patients across Colorado to not necessarily have to drive to Denver to be able to get their clinical research. And finally, I think we're trying to expand on this even further and to move toward having statewide access to clinical trials. And eventually, this is my hope, is in the future, we're going to be able to actually have a contract research organization that will run clinical trials out in our rural sites across Colorado, so that we can actually have patients who can't get to even our UC Health sites have access to the research. We're also hoping to, in the next couple months, re-engage Denver Health as a partner and be able to also have our patients here in the Denver metro area who may be not having access to the campus be able to be involved in clinical research. And the goal is, as we've heard, is to change the face of cancer and to be able to make the opportunities for our patients who 10 years ago wouldn't have been able to be here after, and 30 years ago who might not have been able to be cured from their cancer, to have access to the treatments that may cure them. So it's very exciting. It's an exciting time to be in Colorado and to be able to be involved in this opportunity to bring the cutting edge work that we're doing out to all of our patients across Colorado. So, and again, thank you to all of you for being here today.
So, because Karyn has to leave for another function, does anyone have a question or comment now to ask her? So I'll ask one then. So what do you think it'll take to get our clinical trials statewide? I mean, what do we actually have to step up? We're now at a couple of places along the Front Range, but how do we actually get it more accessible across the state?
Yeah. So right now we have the sort of benefit and the luxury of using the resources that are already in place with having the UC Health system. But one of the things that's very important about doing clinical research is maintaining the high quality of how the treatments are delivered, but also how the data is acquired and how we maintain the data so we can really assess how these treatments are working. And so having oversight is a big part of it. And so we'd have to have sort of a central group that could help with the regulatory and all of the work that needs to go into opening trials, but also making sure when the trials are being implemented that the treatments are being done accurately, that the data is being collected in a way that's standardized. And that's going to take funds, and we need, well, whether it's philanthropic funds, whether we can get pharma to fund us, or whether we can get additional funds from our state to be able to invest in developing this type of system. And what we call them are CROs, and these are these groups that actually run clinical trials, oftentimes for big pharmaceutical companies, and they charge, when we want to run a trial, sometimes they'll charge like $1 million just to do the oversight for these studies. So it's not, it's not a small amount of money. So this has to be a real investment in being able to do this.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next speaker is Dr. Eduardo Davila, who was recently recruited to CU from the University of Maryland. He's a professor of medicine in the Division of Medical Oncology and holds the Amy Davis Chair of Basic Human Immunology in the School of Medicine. Dr. Davila is co-leader of the Cancer Center's Tissue Host Interaction Program, which is one of the 4 main programs in the Cancer Center. He's spearheading our efforts to understand the role of the immune system in the development and progression of cancer. And you remember from my summary slide of what the plan of attack is, one of them was to use immunotherapy, and he's one of the key leaders on campus attacking that. Eduardo?
Great. Thank you, Rich, and thank you all for attending today's important event. As Rich mentioned, my name is Eduardo Davila. I'm a recent recruit from the University of Maryland. I'm part of both the Department of Medicine and the Cancer Center, and part of my responsibilities really are to serve the university and the medical campus and the Cancer Center as Director of Immunotherapy for the Division of Medical Oncology. So my research team and I are really focused on developing the next generation of immunotherapies. So how many of you are familiar with immunotherapies? Excellent. So quite a bit of you. I think had I asked that question 5 years ago, I think that we would have fewer responses. But for those of you not familiar with the therapy, this is a particular form of therapy that's intended to activate the patient's immune system and redirect it against cancer. So an example for those of you still not familiar with this, you'll recall that former President Jimmy Carter was diagnosed with a particularly a lethal type of cancer. It was advanced melanoma. It had migrated and invaded his brain. So he was treated with an immunotherapy called Keytruda. So, the development, which was incredibly effective in him. So the development of new and more effective immunotherapies is incredibly relevant to the people of Colorado. As pointed out earlier, cancer is actually the leading cause of death in the state of Colorado. 26,000 patients are expected to be diagnosed with cancer this year alone. 8,000 will succumb and pass away from cancer. But immunotherapy really is bringing in and heralding a new hope for cancer patients. So in general, there are 2 forms of immunotherapy. One form is called checkpoint blockade therapy. This is the type of therapy that Jimmy Carter was treated with, and many of you might have seen commercials on the television. Keytruda or pembrolizumab is what it goes by. And this form of therapy has been really termed a real blockbuster therapy, in particular because of its ability to activate the patient's immune system and destroy cancers that are typically resistant to all other forms of therapies. So immunotherapy for checkpoint blockade has really revolutionized how we treat patients. The second form, this checkpoint blockade therapy has been termed curative in a subset of patients. So it's estimated that 30 to 40% of patients that receive this therapy will have incredibly durable, long-lived, and potentially curative responses. 30 to 40% doesn't sound like a lot, but for patients that didn't have an alternative prior to that, this is obviously a lifesaver. And we're working towards trying to serve the remainder of the 60% that aren't responding. Another form of immunotherapy is called cellular immunotherapy. Have some of you heard of CAR T-cell platform therapy? Excellent. So several of you have. Great. So this is also a transformative form of therapy. And what this entails is the collection of the patient's immune cells, genetically modify those immune cells, and then put them back into the patient. Now, once inside the patient, these immune cells will migrate throughout the entire body, find the cancer, and destroy it. Again, this is an incredibly transformative type of medicine, and we at the University of Colorado are quite fortunate to have very skilled physicians and highly trained physicians such as Dr. Terry Frye, who are leading the effort in establishing this university as a premier institute in that type and other type of immunotherapies. I also want to highlight, and it's important to note that faculty here at the University of Colorado are not only at the forefront of treating patients with these novel immunotherapies, but scientists and physicians are really at the cutting edge of developing the next generation of immunotherapies. We're at the cutting edge of being able to generate and develop therapies that will not only serve those 30% of populations, but will be more effective in those in more patients against different types of cancers. And then just a few more points I'd like to highlight. Investing in cancer research is important for helping to recruit and maintain top talent in the state of Colorado. This will ensure that Colorado remains at the forefront of cancer research and treatment, not only statewide, nationwide, but worldwide. Investing in cancer research helps ensure that our medical students, our nursing students, our PhD students are trained and taught by the top leaders in the field. Supporting cancer research also really offers unique opportunities for faculty to develop patents, license these patents, and then establish pharmaceutical partnerships with pharmaceutical companies that will then reinvest in the basic research, that will then reinvest in moving these trials forward. As it was pointed out earlier, this is moving these types of trials is incredibly time-consuming and costly, but having partnerships with pharmaceutical companies can offset some of the costs associated with it. So the state only has to invest a little bit more to make it happen. And finally, probably a little bit of a tangential and unique aspect to this is that investing in cancer research provides the unique possibilities of establishing new biotech companies using homegrown technologies developed by faculty at the University of Colorado systems. So with this said, I thank you all for your attention, and we'll be happy to take questions after the last panelist. Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Eduardo. Our next panelist is Dr. Terry Frye, who's a professor of pediatrics. He was also very recently recruited to the University of Colorado, and he came from the National Cancer Institute, where he was head of hematologic malignancies in the pediatric branch. He's really a pioneer and developed one of the first cell-based immunotherapies for pediatric leukemia, and you'll hear more about this. He here is initiating Colorado's first CAR T-cell trial in pediatric leukemia at the Children's Hospital, and he also has parallel trials at the University of Colorado Hospital in adult hematologic malignancies. He just recently was awarded a $4 million grant from the National Cancer Institute to advance immunotherapy in children and adolescents. He's our Director of Cancer Immunotherapy and co-director of the Human Immunology and Immunotherapy Initiative here at CU Anschutz. Terry?
Thank you, Rich, very much. And it's a pleasure being here today. I thank you for your attention and give me an opportunity to tell you what I'm incredibly passionate about. I want to thank the medical campus for being so welcoming. I've been here, I guess, since August. And so I'm really a newbie, and it's really a delight to, I guess, sort of call myself a Coloradan. But I also want to thank one other person in the room, and Pollyea, the head of the Center for Cancer and Blood Disorders at the Children's Hospital, who called me about, I guess, 3.5 years ago, about this opportunity, at which point I said no, because I really wasn't looking to move. But she was very enticing, and I want to thank her for encouraging me to come this way. So thank you. So as Eduardo said, I mean, the field of cancer immunotherapy is really in its infancy, quite frankly. I've been in it long enough to remember when we were quite good at curing tumors in mice, but not doing very much in patients. We were running trials and working hard, but there just wasn't much happening. And so it's really been, I've been very fortunate, I think, and lucky to have been involved in a field that, due to the work of lots of individuals before me, has really sort of come to fruition. As Eduardo said, I mean, really there's been two flavors of immunotherapy, and the one that I've been involved in has been this field of, CAR T cell therapy, which it sounds a little bit Buck Rogerish when you hear about it, because it really involves genetically modifying the immune system in such a way that the patient's immune cells are able to see the cancer. It turns out that in many forms of cancer, even though the immune system can be effective, it's sort of hidden from the immune cells. And so by re-educating these immune cells and reinfusing them back into the patients, we've been able to demonstrate that you can get eradication of large amounts of tumor in patients that are refractory to other forms of treatment. So it's really been a pretty remarkable last 5 years or so since this really began. So, the first experience with this was with CD19, which is a protein that's expressed on the surface of leukemia cells in children and adults and adult lymphoma. And, across about 5 or 6 phase 1 clinical trials, we saw remissions in about 70 to 80% of patients, almost unheard of in the context of early phase clinical trials, with refractory leukemias. And this very rapidly went into phase 2 trials, or the trials that are used for licensing. And just last year was approved by the FDA for treatment of children with ALL first. The first indication was a pediatric cancer, almost unheard of in the field of oncology, whereas pediatricians were kind of used to hand-me-down therapies from the adult oncologists. The second indication was adult lymphoma. Illustrates a couple things. First is that this therapy can work, but I think the second is that it really is important to do studies with these targeted therapies in specific types of diseases. We really can't rely on innovation in adults to help children with cancer. So I guess we're currently in a glasses half full, glasses half empty point of this. We know that some children can be cured with a single infusion of these cells now. But we also know now that about half of the patients that go into remission will eventually relapse with leukemia that becomes resistant to the CD19 CAR. And so, we ran parallel trials at the NCI targeting a different protein, and were able to demonstrate that we could get about 3/4 of those patients back in remission. So, proof of principle that the first one wasn't a one-off, that we actually can develop another CAR that targets a different protein and get remissions in patients. So I really think this field is in its infancy, and I think centers around the country are really sort of, deciding whether they're going to be a center that's going to be a go-to place for delivery of the commercially available, cellular therapies, or whether centers are going to be a part of the innovation that's going to decide what this field's going to look like in 5 years. And the reason I came here is because what I saw on this campus was really exciting. I saw all of the pieces in place to really be a part of the next iteration of this. Strong science, excellent clinical programs, both adult and pediatrics, a biomanufacturing facility that can make the products that go into patients, and a strong commitment, by the institution, and all of that is in place. And so, at this point, as you heard from Eduardo, we're about ready to launch the first investigator-initiated trials on campus, one in adults, one in pediatrics in 2019. Hope there will be many more to follow, and it's really exciting to think about this institution really being a leader in the next generation of this form of therapy for cancer that looks so promising. So thank you.
Thanks, Terry. Our next speaker is Dan Polya. He is the Clinical Director of Leukemia Services at University of Colorado Hospital. He has served as the Principal Investigator of many, many early phase clinical trials testing these various new treatments. And he's received funding from all the major organizations in his disease. American Society of Hematology, American Society of Clinical Oncology, and Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. He's part of the Cancer Center's innovative hematology program that targets cancer stem cells. He's really been instrumental in testing new treatments that promise to change the standard of care for acute myeloid leukemia, also known as AML, both in older adults as well as other patient populations. Dan, thank you.
Thanks so much, Rich, and it's really great to be here. Thanks everybody for being here today. I loved your anecdote about Bill. Just want to comment, for those of you who don't know, Bill is still here. He's at work every day. I have the privilege of sitting by him in clinic, and I've learned so much from him, and he just really exemplifies what the University of Colorado is. So what he did for you, he does still every day and is probably doing right now. So being able to work with people like him is a pleasure. So the disease I work on is acute myeloid leukemia. And this disease is an absolute monster. This is among the most aggressive types of cancer known to man. And, I came over here from Stanford about 7 years ago, and hoping to be able to make a dent in this disease. Realistically, it has been decades since there have been any realistic improvements in outcomes for patients with this disease. We just have not been able to figure this disease out or have really any effective treatments. And almost every patient diagnosed historically with AML dies from their disease. About 5 years ago, we had the luck to recruit Craig Jordan, who's now my division chief, as the head of hematology. And Craig is one of the world's premier experts on leukemic stem cell biology. So he knows more about leukemia stem cells than almost anybody else. And the idea here is that if you can target the leukemic stem cell population, that's the root cause of this disease. And we've been spending a lot of time historically working on killing rapidly dividing cancer cells. But if you put the focus on the stem cell population, you could potentially make a really big impact on this disease. The problem has been, for many years, we haven't known much about the stem cell population or what its weaknesses are. Craig had a lot of decades of work and thoughts on this that he brought to our institution, and immediately our policy, our unifying theme of the hematology division here has been, how do we take what Craig has done in the lab and bring it into the clinic? And about 3-4 years ago, we had an opportunity to do just that. There was a way that a drug company making a drug, manufacturing a drug that we thought may in fact target the leukemic stem cell population. And so we very excitedly participated in this clinical trial. We put on the lion's share of these patients onto this clinical trial, and the results are astounding. What we have seen in these patients is unlike anything that we have ever seen in treating AML for decades, certainly in my relatively short career. And this speaks to the power of what can happen if you target the leukemic stem cell population. And based on this work and based on the patients that we treated here, this was FDA approved the day before Thanksgiving. So just very recently now has been released into the world for general use. So what does that mean for the patients that we treated here? That means that for the last 3 years, if you had AML in Colorado and you came to our institution, you received a treatment that would be the way this disease was treated in the future. You didn't get the present treatment, you got the future treatment. And that is really what the power of a clinical trial is. That's what we're trying to do. Karyn told you about the infrastructure we set up to develop our own clinical trials. And this is why, because of the opportunity to treat a patient in a way that is not available today, but will be available in the future. And so, in addition to the patient outcomes, working with Craig and his lab, we've been able to leverage all the patients that we treated to not just see these great clinical outcomes, but to understand how this works. And now for the first time, we've published several papers describing how this regimen kills leukemic stem cells. And it's completely novel. No one has ever shown you can kill a cancer cell in this way. It takes advantage of the metabolism of a cell and a particular weakness that leukemic stem cells have with respect to metabolism. So this is a brand new area. You've heard about chemotherapy. We have experts in immunotherapies. There is this new potential way to kill a cancer cell that has previously not been described, but I think presents great hope for the future of not just our disease, but for treating other cancers potentially in the future. And this is a Colorado story. So, what's happened is that over the course of the last couple years, my clinics have gone from a very somber, depressing place where, patients were relapsing and death was always just around the next corner, to a place where we don't talk much about cancer anymore. I make them come in to check on them, but really what has happened over the last couple of years is I've gotten to know people and their grandchildren and the vacations they take. And that's the kind of relationship that I always wanted as an oncologist to have, but as an AML doctor, that's never really been a possibility. So, we've leveraged this for now a $5 million grant from the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society that myself and Craig and James, another brilliant leukemia researcher, and Terry are all investigators on. And we've also developed follow-up clinical trials based on what we've learned, these IITs, these investigator-initiated trials that Karyn told you about, because we know probably more about how this treatment works than anyone else. So we have 2 pilot studies here at the University of Colorado, just for patients in this region, where we think we know how to make it even better, and we can extend it to even more patients. So that's what we're really excited about. That's what we're working on. And this place is ground zero for all of this work. So thanks.
Thanks, Dan. Our last panelist, Dr. Ginger Borgeous, has been here at the University of Colorado Cancer Center since 2003. She's nationally and really internationally renowned as an expert that specializes in the care of young women or pregnant women with breast cancer. She's director of our Young Women's Breast Cancer Translational Program and director of the Breast Cancer Research Program. In addition, she's Deputy Division Head of Medical Oncology at the School of Medicine and holds the Robert F. and Patricia Young Connor Endowed Chair in Young Women's Breast Cancer Research. She leads our efforts as part of the Orion program that I showed you on my slide. And she will give you more details on this and the exciting promises that this really holds in our fight against cancer. Ginger?
Thanks, Rich. I, too, am a product of Bill Robinson. He was part of my recruitment here 15 years ago, and it was through his ardent support and vision in understanding that young women's breast cancer was a bit different, that we now have a premier young women's breast cancer, both research program and specialized clinical care program at this institution. Along the way, Bill also roped me into, or should I say gave me the opportunity to participate in what was our fledgling community engagement program 15 years ago. When I came here, it wasn't, were you going to do an outreach clinic? It was, which of the outreach clinics were you going to go to? And so I followed him up I-70 once a month to the Glenwood Springs area and took care of patients out there. And what that taught me was a great respect for the community docs who live and breathe out there and take care of the yeoman's number of patients out in the hinterlands of Colorado, and the marked difference that requires in skill set and fortitude compared to those of us who get to sort of sub-specialize in one disease and have a plethora of brains around us at every table to be able to reach out to if we need a question answered. It also made me realize that part of our mission had to be to continue bringing the advanced technologies, research opportunities, and what we now call advanced personalized medicine to the whole of Colorado, because this is a big state, and we need to be the ones to bring it out to there. So in addition to what I do in my breast cancer life, I also jumped at the chance when I was offered to help build our participation as an institution in the Orion project. My mom had a saying, it was many hands make light work, and that's exactly what Orion is. So Orion stands for the Oncology Research Information Exchange Network. So it's not spelt like the constellation, there's an A, even though they use the 3 stars of the Hunter's Belt. What Orion is a true private-public patient partnership on the best level. You can't be interested in cancer research and not understand that there are now large consortia coming together by which big data and large clinical resources and a lot of researchers are trying to get together and do things as a collaborative manner. And I believe that Orion represents one of the best examples of doing it successfully and also doing it in a way that is quite unique. So right now, who participates in Orion includes 18 institutions that are all A-team, NCI-designated high-level cancer centers across the United States. And we were the third to join, thanks to the visionary leadership of many of the folks here in the Cancer Center. It's also all of the patients at those institutions that have the opportunity to participate, which means you start increasing numbers in a logarithmic manner very quickly. All of the researchers at that institution, and the private-public part becomes the fact that pharma actually has the opportunity to support this organization, but in a relatively distant way. This isn't us working for them. This is them working with us so that they can contribute their large financial resources from the drugs, such as Keytruda, that you've heard, that have made them billions of dollars, but put it into a research organization where then what they contribute allows us to do cutting-edge science that would not otherwise be affordable by even one institution, let alone one researcher or one lab. And all of the data that gets supported, whether it's Pharma A or Pharma B, goes into a pool. So it doesn't matter if A paid for it, B gets it if B signs up too. And all of the researchers involved get it, and all of the people who are participants in the clinical trial have the opportunity to potentially benefit from it, regardless of who pays. And that's really important because these companies are springing up all over the place. And some of them are a little bit more profit-oriented and not going to share data. And that's not how we're going to move things forward for the folks who have to deal with cancer diagnoses in the modern times. It's also participated in by government. The VA is looking at this as something that they want to join, and it has been part of the Biden moonshot priorities, and all of you have supported this. So obviously you get it. Why should anyone who is diagnosed with cancer participate in this? Well, interestingly, to be a participant in Orion, or the master clinical protocol that is utilized across all these cancer centers, you only have to be over 18 and either have a diagnosis of cancer or be at risk for cancer. So technically, everyone in this room, except for a couple of folks, I'm pretty sure, are over the age of 18, and therefore we could hand you consent forms on the way out and you could all sign up. But the reason why an institution should participate is because it really allows us to do things on a scale that would be otherwise completely unachievable. And for the patients who participate, what is important that we communicate to them, and I think Orion does a good job of communicating this, is that they are our most valuable resource. We can have the fanciest microscope, the most amazing piece of equipment in the lab, but the best model of success of how we fight cancer is a human being who gets it and survives it. It is from that person that we have the best opportunity to learn what we need to know. The second best opportunity is from the person who gets that cancer and does not survive it, and to be able to compare the differences between the two. But if you don't have something set up like Orion, then for the person who gets diagnosed and does not survive, we lose the opportunity to capture them. And if you collect the data and the information along the way, then we learn as we go, and that person is a part of the research team. The people who sign up for this project are considered equal parts of the research team as I am, or anyone who helps us do it. So across these 18 institutions, what we do is we have one protocol that we've all had the chance to vet and weigh in on and say, this is how we want to do it. And when I say we, I want to be clear, it's not just the researchers. There's a panel of patient advocates. Anyone in this room could be one of our members if you were interested. And they all get together and say, this is how we think it should be done. These are the priorities, and this is what we're going to agree to. And then it goes out across the institutions. As patients sign up, their information is entered into a database, and if they're having surgery or a biopsy or something along those lines, their tissue is taken and stored for research purposes. A part of it also undergoes what's called genomic sequencing. So you saw the really cool video with Rich where there's a part of the cell that goes wrong, that goes rogue, that turns a healthy cell into a cancer cell. And that genetic mutation is not a gene mutation you got from mom or dad. It's the genetic mutation of your tumor that fingerprints it and makes it different from your healthy cells or from anyone else's cancer. And so every tumor that we take from a participant in Orion currently undergoes in-depth genomic sequencing with some of the best technologies available today. And also that person's germline, what they did inherit from mom and dad, also undergoes full sequencing. So in time, we'll not only be able to compare tumors, but we'll be able to compare human beings and why one got one and why one didn't, and why one did okay and why one did not. So in my view of the world, participation in a research protocol like this is hope. Because if you are someone who beats the odds and does well, you will then help somebody else who's newly diagnosed become like you, because we will have learned. Alternatively, if you're not someone for whom your cancer is going to work out and you're going to end up passing away, or you've lost a loved one to cancer like I have and many people in this room have, if that person's in this database, they're contributing so that the next family or the next person doesn't have to go through that. Now, obviously, if I start talking about we're taking people's DNA and we're taking their information, and did I mention we follow them lifelong, which is one of its attributes. So it's not just a snapshot in time today of that person's cancer, but it's their cancer and their life with that cancer, for better or for worse. Obviously, you might be thinking, well, what are the protections here? The beauty of this is each institution stands on its own. Our patient's information is our own. There's no private information that leaves this institution. There's an enormous team that guards the security around all of this at our institution and also at the national level. So someone can know safely that if they are participating, yeah, information about them will be out there, but it's not identifiable. No one knows that it's them and their cancer. Also importantly, as researchers and as an institution, we have full say in this. We're not giving our resources away. We're keeping them here, and we get to decide which of the projects that come forward or which of the projects we want to do that go forward. And importantly, as one might imagine, when you hear about new drugs being developed and new things getting FDA approved, if anyone in the room has an MBA, you start thinking, well, that's a business opportunity. And so everything that is developed at this institution is our IP. If I find the cure for young women's breast cancer, we'll be talking. But Orion won't own it. We will own it. And similarly, if we participate in a great discovery at another institution, there'll be a share of that pie if it's worthy and according to all the rules and regulations. So the other important thing about this is it's not a static contribution by our patients. It's not, give me your data, give me your tumor, give me your germline, good luck. Because all of this gets put into a database and there's pharma that's involved, there's also the opportunity that clinical trials, whether we write them at our institution, one of the researchers at another institution writes them, or the pharma company writes them, will come out through the consortium. So we'll get clinical trials open across these 18 institutions faster and with better resources. And also what it allows for is that in time, with the massive amount of data we have on individualized targets, rather than a company saying, okay, I've got a target and I've got a drug, go find your patients. I've got a target, I've got a drug. From your data that you have in Orion, I now know there's 250,000 patients with a multitude of different cancers that have that target. Let's set up 3 clinical trials. And by the way, Dr. Messersmith, Mr. Jones, who you're seeing on Tuesday, has that target. If Mr. Jones needs care right now, you might want to consider him for this clinical trial. So Mr. Jones will get a return on his investment for having participated in this study. We're not at the return on investment today. That is about 3 to 5 years down the line, not magical fantasy of the future, 3 to 5 years down the line. We've had Orion open at this institution for 2 years. In that time, and with the support of many people in this room, we have been able to accrue 4,500 people from our institution who have sought care here. We have been able to start doing the germline analysis on them and their tumors and have close to 1,000 cases already done with information in the bank. We have supported 2 researchers going for R01 level grants who, because they had access to the data that was convincing to the reviewers that they could do the work that they were planning on it, got extremely high scores. And we are starting to work on research projects that will be utilizing the information that we have on hand. So where do we go next? There's no reason why everyone in Colorado couldn't participate in this if they get a diagnosis of cancer. It's signing a consent form. And then because of things like electronic medical records and the internet, there's plenty of opportunity for people to do that, even if they never park at the Anschutz Medical Campus or meet any of us as individual care providers. What it also allows is that if they are a participant in Orion and their cancer does not go well, at some point in time, not Dr. Messersmith, but Dr. Rivera or Dr. Bergen or Dr. Kilborn is going to be the one who gets the letter saying, Mr. Jones, in your clinic 90 miles away from the institution or over 100 miles away from the institution might benefit from going all the way into town and participating in this clinical trial. And in time, with the efforts that you heard Dr. Goodman speak of, maybe that clinical trial will be in his or her backyard as well. So I'll end on just saying that for individual researchers, this is an enormous opportunity. I study young women's breast cancer, which is only 13% of all breast cancer. In 15 years that I've been here and with the support of many wonderful people, I've been able to build a database from which we have learned many important things about young women's breast cancer, including potentially a way to prevent it in women who have children. But I would have gotten that work done in 5 years if I had had a research like Orion, not 15. So it's an enormous return on the investment if we can make something like this happen and keep the scale going at the pace we've been. Thank you for your time.
So I want to be mindful of people's schedule. So it's 2 p.m. right now, and if you have another appointment to go to, please feel free to get up and leave. But what I would like to do is take about 5 or 10 minutes of questions, if there are any from the audience, or even comments. Yes, back there, please.
One for the AML specialist. Do you do any work with E-selectin inhibitors, and do you think that's showing a lot of promise?
That's a great question, a very specific question. But yeah, so I'm on the Data Safety Monitoring Committee for a company that's running an E-selectin based therapy for AML. So we don't participate in that study here, but I'm very aware of what they're doing. They just presented some of their data at the recent hematology meeting. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a potentially exciting strategy, and you know, there are many new opportunities in AML, that one and many others.
And sorry, one more quick one, if you don't mind, for immunotherapy. What inning are we in with CAR T cell, and do you think CRISPR-Cas9 shows as much promise as CAR T?
I mean, we're in the top of the first inning, really, quite frankly. I mean, we're at the point where we've shown proof of principle that the therapies are effective. I think that CRISPR-Cas9 is certainly being explored as a more specific way to genetically modify T cells. Whether that's ultimately going to be a better approach, you know, remains to be seen. You know, it's kind of fascinating. I mean, I think, you know, sitting here right now and trying to think about, you know, what this field's going to look like in 5 years. I mean, there's just so much happening. There's been such an explosion of research that I don't even think any of us know what it's going to look like. There's so many different potential places where this could evolve that it's really hard to say how these things are gonna, these newer technologies are gonna play out. And one thing I've become humble about is preclinical models are only that, they're preclinical models. We really only know when we take these therapies into patients.
Any other questions or comments? Yes. So the question was, are the side effects from immunotherapy as bad as traditionally from chemotherapy?
They're different. And what I mean by that is that, you know, I mean, hair loss, those sorts of things, I mean, we don't see that necessarily with immunotherapy. But on the other hand, you know, an immune response is pretty violent sometimes. So when you get the flu, you know, the symptoms are not from the virus. That's the immune response against the virus. So when these patients get these cellular therapies or the checkpoint inhibitors, they have fevers that are higher than I've ever seen and can get quite sick. So it's a really different, you know, pattern of toxicity. With the CAR T cells, it lasts for about, you know, 3 to 5 days. And the amazing thing about this is it's, in most cases right now, it's a single therapy. You infuse it once, they have 5 days in the month that they're either in remission or they're not.
Yeah, and if I can just add to that, so that's an incredibly important part of this checkpoint blockade therapy. And then oftentimes therapy has to be ceased because the side effects are worse than the disease in some cases. But importantly, a group of investigators here at the University of Colorado are incredibly vested and focused on developing models to predict which patients are likely to develop these side effects, and can we cut down the amount of therapy that's administered, or can we even just simply reduce the overall toxicity associated with that? So I'd like to think that we're at the cutting edge of exploring different ways to predict so that we can continue to maintain these patients on therapies.
Yes, please. In how many minutes?
I'll try to do this in 30 seconds, and then if anybody wants more details, I'm happy to stick around afterwards and talk to you about that. But I love the question. This is what I love. I think about it all day long. So essentially, there've been a number of things that have sort of enabled this. I mean, the first is, the ability to efficiently genetically modify cells. I mean, gene therapy has been around for a long time, but it was pretty inefficient in the beginning. Largely used to correct, genetic disorders. So we've gotten pretty good at modifying cells at a pretty high frequency. That's the first thing that happened. The second thing is that, the immune system recognizes target cells in a pretty sophisticated way that's kind of restricted for each patient. And so when you developed a cellular therapy based on the natural immune response, it was really only applicable to a subset of the population. So the receptors that we use, the CAR refers to chimeric antigen receptors because it's sort of a hybrid of a couple of different receptors that take away that restriction element, if you will. And then the last question you asked was sort of you asked about how we collect these cells. So, there was an experience with cellular immunotherapy going back decades at the surgery branch with Steve Rosenberg's. And, he took a very simple approach where he said, listen, melanomas have T cells, immune cells in them. They must be seeing the cancer in some way. Let's take them out and grow them up to really large numbers, in the laboratory, and then put them back into patients in large numbers. And he got regression and remission in patients with melanoma. Unfortunately, that was really unique to melanoma. And it took this huge enterprise to grow these cells up to enormous numbers, like a month to grow these cells sometimes. So when we started the CAR T cell approach, we figured it was going to be the same story. The dose of CAR T cells is about 0.1% of the dose that is required to cure using that TIL therapy that was described. And we're at a point now where we can probably generate those cells from a blood draw, and we can generate those cells in about a week.
Okay, well, why don't we wrap it up there? I hope what you've seen in the last hour and a half so is a sampling of the great work going on here, the very talented people here to my left, and also the passion that we have here in fighting cancer. So thank you so much for coming today, and enjoy the rest of the day.